Well, hi, this is Sam. As you see, a bit of a hectic start to the event there. I've got some flashing lights in my little studio here today. I wanted to show you the outside view of the world, the distant hills in the Troodos area of Cyprus on this sunny late September day. Anyway, what we're talking about today is who will inherit your life's worth at the end of the day. Who is going to be the people that benefit from your money? Is it going to be the government? Is it going to be your family, or is it going to be a charity, or will it be somebody else? We we don't know if you don't make your decisions. If you don't make your decisions, then it's going to come down to the law, and so the law will determine where everything goes, and that's called dying intestate. So who's going to inherit your life's worth, and when are you going to make those decisions? And there's a number of different stages you can do that, and we're going to have a look at that in a few minutes. So again, one final apology before we get going is sorry for the lighting today. We tried hard and failed miserably, but the content is good, to stick with us. You hear us often talking about tax creep in the Living Working Abroad show, and it's interesting to note that you can say about taxes that um, the tax of the state where does it come from? Well, it comes from the state. You need to think about that very carefully. If you go back 100 years in America, there was no income tax. The state uh, generated its own tax and its own revenue by tariffs. Um, Around about 100 years ago, income taxes started to be introduced as a tax creep in America, and that's become the major source of taxation. Trump has come in and trying to reverse that in a way, not directly trying to repeat the same thing, but in introducing tariffs, potentially is going to be raising a lot of revenue for the government, which then in turn allows them to cut taxes, which is exactly what his big, beautiful tax legislation in the States is doing. It's increasing tariffs on uh, countries that charge tariffs back to American trade, or to people that are politically, in a global sense, causing problems, and is using that money to reduce the taxes for the American people. Interesting times, and uh, a, a back to the future moment in terms of tariffs becoming more important in the state being able to take control of its own revenue by trading and being independent. The other thing that we've seen this week is that Trump endorsing to the UN and on its 80th birthday, very much a position that, yeah, we are now controlling our borders. United Nations was supposed to be about protecting nations from invasion from foreign governments, from border disputes, or from exploitation of individuals or countries. And it's very much lost its way in that sense. It's this point. But the American government, in less than a year, under Donald Trump, have managed to roll back to a position where in the 4 months to August, they've had zero illegal immigrants crossing their border. Now, depending upon what your political persuasion is, I know that if I cross a border, if any of my clients cross a border, we have to have a passport, and we have to have increasingly an electronic travel authority to get across that border. Okay. Now that is the requirement. That is the requirement to legally cross that. So as soon as you cross a border without the documents, that is an illegal criminal act. But then they fall behind the asylum laws of the world, which are created to protect the likes of the Jews who suffered under the Nazi regime in Germany. So other races, creeds, and colours have been exploited and manipulated by autocrats or dictators over the years. That's what asylum is for, not for economic migrants, not for economic migrants, and certainly not for religious migrants. So, um, you know, closing the borders to those illegal migrants, is a good thing. And the point is, in law, despite the far left government still arguing about human rights, the law says if you create a legal act and you go back to where you come from, what Trump is doing is what uh, the British tried to do before unsuccessfully, is if you cross the border illegally, we will take you back to your home country or we'll take you back to another country. Um, the other oxymoron in all this for the UK is that um, they're receiving asylum seekers from France who are housing them in France already. Why aren't they seeking asylum in France? So it's a bit of a duplicitous behaviour from the EU and from the French government towards the British, which they're all sucking up to and they're all accepting. So it's interesting, Trump calling out to end this illegal and criminal action for countries to protect their borders and allow people to live and work abroad in their home country or legally relocate to overseas in a peaceful, stable environment to create prosperity and wealth around the world. And this is what PROACT supports its clients to do when they're living or working abroad. When we look at tax creep as well, the other thing to do is that how do we fix that? How do we fix that? It's a moot point, and we see constantly the same thing progressively since the Second World War, where governments are trying to increase spending and increase spending to provide more benefits, more welfare, more support, more childcare. Um, you don't actually need those, but we've got them. And what we know is that communism doesn't work. Ask the people of Cambodia, communism doesn't work. Ask the people of Russia, Russia is not a communist state anymore. It doesn't work. Only when the people have got the freedom to create wealth and prosperity for them and their families can we begin to have growth and development going forward rather than poverty and servitude. Tax creep has got to stop at some point, and the governments need to make that choice to do that. Meanwhile, at PROACT, we can help you plan ahead and get there first to stop the tax creep on your wealth. What we're looking at, particularly today, is who will inherit your life's worth. So we've seen that income taxes were introduced 100 years ago in the States, in the 1700s in the UK, and progressively they've increased and increased and extended and extended. And in the last Halloween budget of 24, we saw capital gains taxes on your wealth going up by 80% from 10 to 18%. We saw inheritance tax extended, inheritance tax on your death extended from um, most of your assets to include your pension assets as well. So at 40%. And so now we have income that's taxed up to 45%. Your wealth is taxed up to 24% on capital gains. Your earnings from your business and your wealth that you invest in and create is taxed up to 39%. And then when you die or give everything away, the government wants another 40%. They tax it when you earn it, when you invest in it and generate income from it, and when you try to pass it on to your next of kin. So who do you want to inherit your wealth. If you do nothing, a minimum of 40% of your wealth is going to go to your family, is going to go to the taxman. Now, there are exemptions at the moment. A UK family living in their own home worth over a certain amount of money can potentially pass on £1 million without inheritance tax. But don't forget now that the pension pot is included in that. So if you've got a pension pot of £1 million, that in itself is going to use up your personal allowance of 325. So suddenly all the house and the other investments and valuables are going to be included in that regime. So a whole new rethink is required under the new regime, where we can see in this year's late autumn budget, winter is coming and tax people are going to be extended, looking towards wealth taxes. But the definition of wealth tax for a far left government is anything that moves. Income, your investments, your capital, your pensions, your debt. So if you take the opportunities to plan, potentially some of your wealth can pass down to your next generation. Let's have a look at some of the things that you can do. First of all, in the UK, there's principal private residence relief. So if you've got a property, you maintain that property as your main home in the UK as a taxpayer or expat, non-resident, tax resident abroad. In theory, that is free of capital gains tax when it's sold. That may or may not change in a budget going forward, but that's the situation at the moment. If you rent out, if you relocate overseas and you rent out your property, then it then falls under capital gains tax on death. And the principal private residence relief may not apply. So it's putting that at risk. So consider that asset and what you can do with it to protect the capital. To enjoy the rental income, you don't need the asset, the property asset, to be in your name. And you'll keep hearing me repeat this today. You don't need to own the car. If you lease it, you can still enjoy driving it. You don't need to own the house to get the rental income from it or to live in it happily ever after. You can change the ownership of the asset across your family and still enjoy the benefits during your lifetime. And this is the way forward that we see. There's obviously concessions. If you want to set up a foundation or benevolent association or your own charity or support an existing charity, you can do that. And that's very tax-free to do that, because those charities are an alternative way of supporting people who need those needs and benefits other than taxation. So how can you do that? There's various ways you can protect yourself from inheritance tax during your lifetime. If you're in the UK, you can make gifts out of income, free of inheritance tax, but you need to declare that on your tax return. You can make gifts to children anyway. There could be small gifts each year into a savings pot, or it could be potentially exempt gifts, either under the 7-year rule or just under the 325. So by transferring the asset into somebody else's name, you remove the inheritance tax liability from you. Therefore, when your time comes, whether that's a Dickie Bird 90 or somebody that dies far too young in their 30s or 40s, when that time comes, the inheritance is there for your family. I should have said Ricky Martin, the boxer who sadly died recently in his 40s. So what are you going to do to protect your wealth? If you're a businessman, you insure that. You can insure that against the tax loss, but that costs income today, but at least it's something and it's a way forward. You can also make a will. By making a will, you can say who you want to benefit from your estate. If you do nothing, depending upon the country in which you live and where your assets are held, there's what's called laws of intestacy. And they're different for each country. So in some countries, the children always benefit. In other countries, the spouse can benefit. Um, and there's different rules for different countries. So you need to be very clear where your assets are held and who the potential beneficiaries are if you do nothing and don't make a will. As soon as you make a will, you can nominate your beneficiaries. They can be family, they can be friends, they can be your children and their spouse, or they can be just make it just for your children or your grandchildren. Remember, in most countries, especially in English law, once you're married, a couple, a married couple, they have an element of owning assets together. And depending on the jurisdiction and the type of asset, those assets could be owned jointly. So a joint bank account on death goes straight to the surviving partner. Now that's great if you're in a second marriage and you want to look after your second partner, but not if you've got £2 million in that bank account and you want your children to have some of it. They actually wouldn't necessarily have an entitlement to it because the assets held in the joint names with another person who has got a legal right. Lots of little forebears to plan ahead. Contact us at Private Partnership. We offer free reviews to people living and working abroad or in the UK to advise them on how they can plan ahead to protect their family's wealth when they die, whether it's a sudden death like a Ricky Hatton or a life well lived like our cricket umpire friend as well, Dickie Bird. If you wait to do a will, you have to go through a probate administration process. Even in the best will in the world, the probate administration is going to take 9 to 12 months to complete. In other countries, it could take even longer. It can involve having certified, translated documents coming from all around the world, depending upon where your family and your assets are based. And translations cost money, cost time, different jurisdictions. And the last thing that you want is to be having 4 lots of administration in 4 different jurisdictions around the world to settle your estate for your family and your spouse and your children and grandchildren. So how can you avoid that? Well, one of the ways you do it, if you're in business, you create a holding company, and the holding company owns all the different shares of all the different interests and property and investments that is accumulated. And those shares can be passed to other people on your death. The other thing, though, about with a will, it also involves an inheritance tax return, which is the assessment for how much inheritance tax you're going to pay on your pensions, your residential, commercial property investments, and any other wealth that you've got. So insurance policies, by the way, think about that. You get insurance that pays out a death benefit because of an accidental death. It could pay out a million, and you've got 400,000 of inheritance tax to pay on your insurance as well. So you need to check out the details and check out the facts about who's going to inherit your wealth. Is it going to be the tax man, or is it going to be your family and or the charities and funds that you want to support? How can an individual, how can a family create an enterprise that doesn't die with them? So if you own shares in a company, you own the company doesn't die when you die. The share owner has died, but those shares can be passed to somebody else. Hence, the family business can keep running, even though it's in the administration of the probate administration to transfer those shares over to the next of kin. The company can keep running. The family can still run the business. Now, is that a good succession plan? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So you ask Rupert Murdoch, he's got a proper family succession plan in place, although he has disputes among all his different children. But that's a separate matter. You can still put a succession plan in place for your wealth. So the News Corporation, Sky, and Fox Media is all the shares of all that business is under the control of a family succession plan, which Rupert Murdoch has put in place. You don't need to be one of the richest people in the world to do that. Your family can take control of your events, and whether you've got business, property, artwork, investments, or insurance benefits, you can put those in a family trust to protect you from taxes and as well the cost and delay of probate. Creating a family trust means that the family still retains control. The Duke of Westminster is in effect the inheritor in control of the family trust set up by the original Duke of Wellington. The Duke of Westminster doesn't own the properties in Mayfair and Belgravia. He's a beneficiary of the trust assets, those properties and investments that generate the income that make him one of the richest people in Britain. Both him and his lucky wife, but his wife doesn't inherit it because all the wealth is contained within the trust. So she can enjoy the income and the lifestyle, but the inheritance stays with the family down the generations, and that's lasted for more than 200 years already for the original Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. You too can create your own family trust. It doesn't need to be expensive. The family can stay in control. You can own your property, you can own your business shares, you can own your investments, all within this one trust that looks after your affairs. You can appoint in effect a management board, which are called trustees for your family trust, and they also have a legal obligation to honour your wishes. The trust has a will as well to honour your wishes, that if you're the beneficiary during your lifetime and your spouse, on death, the children or the grandchildren become the beneficiaries, whether it's a school fund, an education fund, a benevolent fund, or a charitable foundation. You can do what you want with your family trust because you retain control and you don't pay 40% inheritance tax. You don't let the government take your money and spend it how they want. You invest it how you want. So you've got control, cost savings, and reassurance that you know who's going to benefit from your estate in your lifetime. There's more as well. An individual is a tax entity. A trust is a tax entity. A company is a tax entity. A property is a tax entity. An investment is a tax entity. So each of those different types of valuable assets is going to be subject to certain types of taxes uh, when a capital event arises, whether that's death, whether it's a sale or a disposal or a relocation. Okay, so they've all got tax numbers, they've all got definition of who the ultimate beneficiary is, and then what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do to make sure that you can avoid inheritance tax on one part of your estate but not on another? The family trust can avoid that because the family trust could be based in a jurisdiction like Cyprus, and it's not too far away. And if you want to engage in a bit of blue sky thinking and look on the sunny side of life, you can consider that Cyprus, with an English law based legal system, has a very effective and very tax efficient family trust regime, which is being confirmed as we speak in 2025 to be reinforced, and with no tax creep, no increases in taxes in the years ahead, and no wealth taxes. The taxes that you've got now, 0% on dividends, 5% on pensions, 15% on companies is fixed. It's not going to go up. So you've got a low tax, English law based economy with no inheritance tax and no capital gains tax for your family's wealth. So if um, an individual cannot meet the requirements or doesn't want to meet the requirements to be an individual Cyprus tax resident, they can still create a Cyprus Family Trust. The Cyprus Family Trust can own assets, it can own company shares, it can own property in Cyprus or abroad, it can own investments in Cyprus or abroad, and control your worldwide wealth in the same way that Google has a Cayman Island based holding company for all its business wealth. It's not exactly the same, but the principle is that you don't have to have everything in one place. And as soon as you change the tax entity of your capital assets from the UK to Cyprus, you're subject to zero inheritance tax, zero capital gains on investment, and no cost and delay of probate. Um, there is a cost to set up the trust and to run the trust, but that's no more and probably less than the cost of delay of probate, and a lot less than the cost of 40% inheritance tax on your pension funds, on your property, and your investments in your business. Contact us at proactpartnership.com for a free review and assessment of how we can help you going forward. One more thing to think about is that the family trust can be set up, but you can be a tax resident in Cyprus as well. It's not going to compromise that planning. So if you are in Cyprus and you've got global assets in property, shares, and investments, it's still not going to incur any tax liability on those. A tax entity has got its tax liability based upon the nature of it, but there's no additional tax liability arising on these global assets from the Cyprus Trust, whether you as an individual are in Cyprus or not. Think about it a bit more. If you've got property rental income in the UK, then at the moment, that rental income is still going to be taxed in the UK. You can't avoid that. That is a fixed tax in the UK. That is what you've got. The only way to get rid of that property rental income in the UK, the tax liability on that, is to sell the property and not have the property rental income. UK property, other than property that qualifies for the personal principal private residence relief, is all subject to capital gains tax up to 24%. Not going to change. It's a fixed tax in the UK. So you do get fixed taxes and you can't avoid those. At the moment, if you've got an investment, a capital gains that arises in the UK and you're living abroad, potentially you could defer the liability of the 24% tax for a few years. That may well change in the next budget. Look at our autumn 25 budget preview vlogs. There was one earlier in September, and we'll do another one at the end of October to preview what might come up before winter comes in the budget this year. So you can't avoid a tax where it's fixed on where you are. In the UK, domicile is fixed to a degree. Now, the one good thing that's happened in the last couple of years, so I've just got distracted by something in the background. Sorry about that. So when you have got the scenario that you've got these gifts coming in, they're not necessarily going to be free of tax in the fixed location. But what you can do is create the fund where it is taxed everywhere else. For more information and guidance, contact us at proactpartnership.com. And as long as we're not distracted, we'll be able to speak to you with a free review and advice. And if you want help and guidance, we can offer tax reports, tax advice, trust administration, creation, and management and administration of those assets for you overseas. And if you do nothing, you've got the probate and the tax reporting and the inheritance tax liability anyway. You can't avoid that. If you do nothing, you've got the cost and delay when you die. If you take action now, you can control who's going to who's going to inherit your estate and your life's worth. If you take action during your lifetime, you can predict that. If you wait until you die, it's too late. The law of the land for the fixed income and taxes will apply. The big thing that changed in 2024, 2025, is that the non-dom laws have changed. Now, while this is aimed at people coming into the UK to increase their tax, the amount they're going to pay for living long term in the UK beyond 4 years, the retrospective effect is that a UK expat who's domiciled by birth in the UK can begin to lose their domicile status in the UK. At the moment, up until April 25, you were deemed domicile by default. It was very hard to prove otherwise. And you had to live outside the UK for 20 years before you could hope to assert and establish that you're no longer tax resident, tax domicile in the UK for inheritance tax. Now, once you get beyond 10 years and up to 20 years as a non-dom, you can assert your right to be non-domicile and therefore remove the liability to inheritance tax of 40% from the UK on your worldwide assets. So it's a big step forward. So do think about that. So one of the new steps that's arisen with more certainty at least, and a clear path, is that if you've got wealth and you retire or choose to live abroad for 20 years or more, you can lose the inheritance tax tail. It will be with you for up to 20 years, but you can begin to lose that liability to the 40% tax. It's going to stay with you for at least 10 years, but then start dropping down. So that's one way. That's another way, a new way, just time to get rid of that inheritance tax tail. And you've still got probate and local taxes to pay through your will and administration when you do die. Even if you're non-domicile as a UK expat, you've still got a liability on UK assets. So if you've left the UK, but you've still got £1 million property in the UK, commercial property, it's still going to be subject to inheritance tax. That doesn't go away at all. So there's lots of tricky little things you can do. A family trust in a tax-free environment, friendly to English law, can help you plan ahead. Make the investment today, make the decisions today. Don't leave it to the professionals and to the taxman to choose who's going to inherit your life's worth when you die. Thanks a lot for listening. Hope you found it a bit interesting. Sorry about the fuzzy start and the poor lighting this week, but at least we've got some blue sky. So let's look forward to the year ahead. Let's plan ahead to see what we can do and enjoy a family that can trust each other to inherit wealth down the generations, across border and down generations, without the inheritance taxes going to the government. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you again next time.